Welcome to The Game. This is the show where we go play by play, analyzing the game of politics. Today, we come together under very heavy hearts. Yesterday, America lost one of its most prominent and passionate voices in the conservative movement. Charlie Kirk, just 31 years old, was assassinated while speaking at Utah University. This was the first stop of his American comeback tour. Charlie was a commentator. He was a builder. He founded Turning Point USA in his teens, creating one of the largest youth-driven conservative networks in the country. He inspired thousands of young people to step into public life, to speak up, and to believe that their voices mattered. Through his podcast, his writing, his speeches, and his relentless energy, Charlie reached millions of people. To many, he was seen as controversial, but always authentic. To his supporters, he was seen as a fearless fighter for faith, freedom, and American values. To his critics, they could not ignore him. But beyond politics, he was a husband, a father, a son, a man of faith. His life was cut short, but his voice will not be cut short because his legacy will continue. He is someone who we will continue to admire. He is someone who we will continue to see through his podcast, through what he left behind. It's a legacy that will be remembered. Joining me today to talk about Charlie Kirk, the incidents of yesterday and the legacy that he leaves behind, is Daniel Garza. Daniel Garza is not just a political commentator, but he is a former White House staffer, and he is also the president of the Libre Initiative. I want to welcome Daniel Garza. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Wadi. Pleasure being on.
Thank you. And Daniel, we have you on today for various reasons. You're someone who, in these moments in our nation, moments where our society has to reflect, you're someone who's been a voice in these moments, but you're also someone when Turning Point USA, very early on, began chapters, began having conversations. You were invited to speak at these events. You're someone who has met Charlie Kirk. So before we dive into the show, I just want to give you a moment, and I just want to hear from you. What are your thoughts in this moment? Just less than 24 hours ago, Charlie Kirk was murdered. I would like to hear your thoughts on this situation.
Well, it's a sad day in America, Wadi. This is heartbreaking to his staff, first and foremost to his family, of course, but to everybody in the center-right movement, folks like myself who are dedicated to promoting a certain set of ideals, American principles. Charlie was an honest man of principle and of deep conviction. We know that because that's what he expressed, right? He was really a leading voice of his generation. And he was a believer in the gospel. He loved God, he loved scripture, and he expressed it freely and with a passion and a conviction that very few could say. And he was a family man, like I said, who deeply loved his country. He was a big believer in dialogue and civility, which we need much more today. And he inspired millions, millions across the country, young kids, that really those on the center right had proven to be a challenge. And many flocked to him because his straightforwardness, his clarity of expression, but also clarity, a moral clarity that he had. You knew where he stood. There was no question about that. And I strongly believe that Charlie modeled proper advocacy as a tireless defender of these American principles. And to be honest with you, as the radical left, if you had a problem with Charlie Kirk, who welcomed dialogue, who welcomed voices, who disagreed with him, let's argue on the merits. Let's have an open and honest discussion in front of others, right, on these issues that impact everyday Americans. If you had a problem with that, oh my God, what must you feel about those folks who are a bit more strident, who are, exactly what you project, Charlie Kirk to have been. And so this appalling violence really is an attack on open dialogue, on freedom of expression. And unfortunately, he's now gone, right? And he's left a deep impact. And he, because he was wildly effective at his job. And that's why they came after him. And I think that the worst tragedy of all is also, the unrealized potential of this young man. He was 31. Mm-hmm. He had an entire future ahead of him. And he was very talented, right? And so in a very real way, this strikes at the core of the hope that we have for future generations, and what does that say of, people who rise up and become advocates of their movements? Are they now, targets? And this is all deeply concerning, Wadi.
Yeah, Daniel, I'd like this to kind of reflect on what is it that he did or how he transformed, I would say, the movement. For many years, conservatives struggled with younger voters. Without a doubt, the left has one of their sort of strongholds uh, has been universities, has been those college years of the youth, where they have taken their point of view, but also it's a location where they have tried to shut down the other point of view. There's
Yeah,
countless stories of folks like Ben Shapiro and many others, Charlie Kirk included, where events were either protested to the point where they couldn't happen. And the
sorry.
protest was aimed to do that. Walk us through what you believe Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA came to do in that movement, in that space specifically. He's someone who targeted, who went after that youth voter. And he did it as a young person himself. He started Turning Point USA at the age of 18. Looking back, how important, how impactful was the work that he did in such a strategic stronghold of the left?
Yeah, well, clearly, he changed the conversation in the universities, right? He opened up dialogue, and then by challenging those on the left to take him on the merits of his ideas, center-right ideas, the principles or ideas based on American principles of freedom of expression, freedom to petition, freedom of religion, freedom to right, a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, to private property, to free trade, to a limited government, to separation of powers. All these American principles that have made us strong. He made a powerful defense of these, and so, and by changing the conversation, he was persuasive, and to the point where, I mean, just think about this: in one election cycle, 44% of male Gen Z switched over to the right. And this was again because of the power of the ideas and the power of of his talent to articulate those ideas, right? And so he made a lot of sense. And when you were the person trying to take him on, he would embarrass you because he just sort of threw common sense at you, right? And those just very persuasive arguments, to the point where, well, if we can't beat him, we're just going to eliminate him. And so, look, soon we're going to know who did it. The FBI it looks like they are sparing no expense and no resource, no manpower on this, because of what it means symbolically to the nation. We'll know what their specific intent was in silencing Charlie by assassinating him. They certainly ain't going to silence his movement.
Mm-hmm.
But what we do know, Wadi, is that this was absolutely political, and an appalling act of violence and an act of terrorism. The intent here was to have a chilling effect on conservative voices, to impose a political view on others through violence. That's terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to fail. That needs to be clear, from the offset. The one thing I have not seen from the center right in reaction is rioting, is wanting violence and vandalism. We're better than that. I've seen prayer. I've seen groups coming together in solemn remembrance, talking about how we're going to now raise our voices and double down on our advocacy in the way that Charlie Kirk modeled it, right? Transparent, honest, public, bring it on, right? Welcome debate, but be understanding and compassionate at the same time. Now, and to your point about the left, it is true that the temperature in our country has steadily been rising, but in no uncertain terms. What I'm seeing is that there is a pattern that has formed over the last 12 to 15 years, that while the right has sort of dialed up the advocacy of their ideas, it is the left that has dialed up the violence. They paint their political opponents as evil. And I think that this induces the mentally unstable to deadly acts of violence. You know, when you go around demonizing conservatives for their political aims, you know, Hillary Clinton talking about irredeemable basket of deplorables, and Joe Biden that we were the dregs of society, fascist, and you know that speech, that famous speech that he gave, that with all that red background, angry, bitter, calling us every name in the book as we were enemies of America. And they constantly refer to us as racist, you know, Nazis and Hitler. I've been called that. I've been caricatured as a Nazi. I've been, you know, been told a fascist on national television that I've had to vociferously counter. You know, you need to dial it down. You know, you have to show mutual respect, tolerance, and understanding, and you know, talk through our differences, which is exactly what Charlie did, right? And that's what angers you, right? Is that he actually did it the right way, and he gave his life for it. And so, I would challenge the center right to continue in prayer, in remembrance, in civility, and understanding and tolerance.
I think that's a key part of this conversation. Charlie, I think will be remembered for many things. I think two core things. In your opening, you mentioned this, a man of faith. There's a video circulating where one of the podcasts where he was a guest, he was asked, what do you want to be remembered for if everything was gone, right? Or if you moved on from the public spotlighted. He said, I want to be remembered for my faith. I want to remember for my belief in my creator. He was someone that in the midst of his career, in the middle of these discussions, would not apologize for his core beliefs in the Bible, his core beliefs in Jesus Christ. What do you think, how important is it for folks who have faith to be able to incorporate that in, per se, public discourse? A lot of the things that he brought when he was talking politics come from his belief. Is this something that you think, one, he will continue to be remembered to as, and then two, what role does faith play in someone's drive when it comes to politics?
I cannot think of a more glorified way to be remembered than to be a voice for Jesus Christ, than to die at the altar of submission to the Almighty. Through the arc of history, from Stephen in the Bible, who was the first martyr, through the martyrs throughout history who have died in the name of God and for the defense of their faith. And you know, the Inquisition, you can go on and on of the people who have died because of their faith. And if that's why Charlie died, if that's why he gave his life, I think he would gladly give it up again in the glory of his creator. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. reminded us that once again, a bullet has silenced the most eloquent truth teller of an era. And the pain that he must feel, you know, having lost first his uncle, who was president of the United States, in John F. Kennedy, and his own father, to a bullet of an assassin, for being an advocate, for being a truth teller. It was poignant, yet damning, I think, of two different generations of Americans, you know, who I think the thread of violence that weaves through humanity continues to this day. And there are people who are inherently evil, and I think some of them are cultivated, stoked into evil action. Yeah, again, I don't know who this person was. I don't know what led him to this position. I'm not going to make any assumptions, but it was evil. And I think moments like this, you know, remind us of how fragile life is, right? You know, but to give your life in the name of God, in submission to God, that's the way I would like to go, and to be remembered for that. I don't want to go yet. Don't get me wrong, you know, because as you know, Adi, you and I, like Charlie, go around the country fighting for these same principles. And I'm motivated by the sense that there's just too much at stake, right? You know, to ease up, and it pushed Charlie. And the best way to honor Charlie is for each of us, you know, to recommit I think to the defense of freedom, to continue to raise our voices for future generations. Evil will not win, and I think it's up to us to make sure that that does not happen. And so I couldn't have been prouder of the achievements of Charlie Kirk, but it is a massive tragic loss.
Yeah, Daniel, that's a key point because I think beyond his faith, at the center of what he did was there's another video circling around of this lady just asking him, "What is this?" And she's referring to he's sitting at a university behind a table, and he very specifically says, "I just believe that when we stop talking to each other, it begins to give room for violence." He says we must have public discourse, we must have public conversations, public debate. I mean, he took, the famous town square, almost literally going into the town square of universities, setting up moments for conversations. Something that we all have seen and witnessed firsthand, some in person, some through social media, is that he gave a mic to individuals who held a different perspective than he did. His events weren't just for conservatives. They weren't just people who believed what he believed. If anything, it was a platform for those who disagreed with him, to an opportunity to have a real discussion. I think that's one of the reasons why many folks admired the work that he did. It's the reason why many who even disagree with him respected him, because he was someone who came with compelling arguments, came with facts to the table. Daniel, I want to ask you, this is not the first time that the United States has seen a tragic assassination of someone of his scale. But it's also, we're in the country where we have for so many years pride ourselves for freedom of speech, for public discourse. Do you think there is a trend that we're seeing now that really needs to be addressed? And how do we address that? What are the conversations that parents should be having with their kids? What are the conversations that adults should be having amongst each other? What's the conversation that conservatives should be having with Democrats and vice versa? What's your analysis here?
Look, deeply concerning of the war on freedom of expression that is being promoted by the left. By demonizing and calling people fascists and Nazis, you're trying to shut down debate. In the worst case, by assassinating national spokespeople of the center right is an act of terrorism, but meant to shut down debate. In England, if you tweet now what the government considers hate speech, you will be arrested. In Australia, that is happening. And so it's deeply concerning when somebody on television in the media expresses the point that what Charlie Kirk was doing out there was spreading hate and hateful words and expressing, offensive language. My God, this man, what he was spreading was Judeo-Christian values, what were ideas that are based on biblical scripture from the Constitution of the United States of America, long held belief that there are two genders. That is what they consider to be hate speech. That is what they are saying. You should stop expressing conservative ideas to be spared violence from those who oppose you. In shorthand, that's what Nate Burleson just said on this morning. Basically, just stop talking about these ideas and you won't get killed. What's going on? Are you kidding me? This is your remedy to this. And then there are people, who of course are questioning, well, why are the Yankees, this institution of Major League Baseball, why did they do this beautiful gesture of a moment of silence for Charlie Kirk at their stadium? Why honor him this way? Why the White House flag at half-mast? And I got to tell you, why is it so easy for the left to celebrate and remember John F. Kennedy Jr., who was not an elected official, not an elected leader, but his death shook them. And it shook me too, right? Because everybody understands this was a leading voice of his generation at the time. And what he fought for and what he stood for. And I may not have agreed with him, but I understood that he was a figure, right? That sort of transcended and the unrealized potential of a JFK Jr. Just imagine that that is what young people see in Charlie Kirk. And can't you have some understanding? Can't you see that people are hurting here, are in pain because of what Charlie Kirk meant to them? To just have a little bit of respect, right? And so when they refuse to have that kind of understanding, it upsets you. It really does. As an American citizen who believes in freedom of speech, who believes in these principles, and they're mocking the guy who carried the banner here. And so look, I think everybody needs to look in the mirror. You need to dial it down. I think we need to respect each other's differences, and stop calling everybody hateful and fascist and Nazis. That is not productive, and it's not conducive to a thriving society.
Yeah, very much so. One of the areas where Charlie was a trailblazer, and one of the areas where I think many people, even his opponents, respected him, was in the area of podcasts, of social media. His kind of rise to fame in many of the things that he did was how he advocated for memes. I mean, he said, "Let's use what the young generation is into." Turning Point USA famously had these memes about government sucks, socialism sucks, and just they talked about government spending. They talked about the issues. They talked about policy. I think one of the areas or famous per se quotes of Charlie was not trying to criticize the person, but trying to criticize the policy. I think we need more of that. We can have discussions on the merits of the belief, on the merits of the policy, without criticizing the person, without demonizing the individuals. No one is saying let's shut down the opinion of others. Let's shut down the platforms that others use. But what he said is, I'm going to use the platforms that I have to have discourse, to elevate the conversation that I believe was there. Daniel, going back to where we kind of started, I mentioned that you spoke at an event of Turning Point USA. If I'm not mistaken, this was one of the areas, this was an event focused specifically on the Hispanic community. If I'm not mistaken, this might have been 6, 8 years ago, where Charlie Kirk kind of early on in his career recognized the force of the Hispanic vote, recognized that many Latinos are conservatives, that many Latinos maybe are conservatives, but have not been approached on those issues, on those values. And through these conferences, he wanted to empower the voice of conservative Latinos, wanted to create a platform where Latinos could hear from several individuals, including yourself. Can you share a little bit about your experience speaking at this event and the importance that Charlie Kirk saw very early on of the Latino community?
Well, one of the things that I've observed, last night and even this morning is how many of my Facebook friends took pictures with Charlie Kirk, right? Who attended the events, who were at an event with Charlie Kirk, and they found Charlie Kirk approachable, accessible. And Charlie Kirk, of course, would take the time to talk to them, to take photos with them. And that speaks to, what kind of person he was, right? I think he was motivated again, by the sense of urgency to preserve American freedoms, and he understood the value of the different coalitions of groups that came together, especially, of course, the Youth Coalition, but and what the Latino community, what our value was, to making sure that the movement was an effective one. But again, it speaks to Charlie Kirk's heart. He died in an activity, doing exactly what he was called to do. Right, was to convene the masses, to express his opinions, to make a defense of those principles, and he died in front of everybody. Right, shot, in front of the crowds that came to listen to him. And the irony, right? And it was all caught on video for the entire world to see. And I think, in a very real way, I think may have made him a legend, in that sense, right? Fighting for the cause, fighting for freedom, like the Minutemen in the American Revolution did, who are soldiers in World War I and World War II, who died in the foreign battlefields in defense of this country and our freedoms, and for the American people. Sure, that wasn't a battle zone, but he knew the risk. You know, he knew the threats on his life. He was well aware of it.
Hmm.
He could have had Wadi um, a top position in the administration. Everybody knows he was super tight with the president, and the
Hmm.
president would have whatever he asked for, but he didn't. You know, I was at several events with him at the White House. I know he was tight with the president. Everybody knows that.
Hmm.
Why didn't he take advantage of that relationship? Why didn't he take advantage of of the levers of government? Um, he felt a calling, right? And that was to advance the cause of freedom to young people, where he felt he was most effective. And so I respect that and I admire that a lot. And it's just, again, just a tragic loss in so many ways.
Yeah, it's a tragic loss. And Dan, I think many conservatives today, many followers of Charlie Kirk, are feeling a wide range of emotions. There's a lot of hurt. Obviously, folks are sad. A life has been taken, but also a voice in the conservative movement. This was to many, not even just to many, it is. It wasn't just a loss of Charlie Kirk or attack on Charlie Kirk, but it was an attack on the values that he spoke up for. It was an attack on the principles that he stood for. So I think many folks are going to continue to reckon with the reality of what we saw yesterday. And I think many folks are going to be thinking, what's the path forward? Because, like you mentioned, I think conservatives, they're not rioting, they're not looting businesses, they're not burning down buildings, but they are having conversations on how do we honor what he stood for? How do we continue to advance our principles and our values? These are values of that believe in the individual, values that stand up for limited government, values of the empowerment of the person, values of faith, of family, of belief. One thing that I do that really stands out to me of Charlie Kirk was this belief in the person. I mean, he spoke many times to men, he spoke many times to women on just the potential that every individual has, and why we must not leave anything on the table. We're all born with certain gifts, certain talents, with a certain calling, and he really believed in that because he's such a public figure and because he is someone who will be remembered. Daniel, the conversation's not going to go away on who is this individual who's still at large, who assassinated Charlie Kirk. We will continue to follow the news in that space. Daniel, I do want to turn the conversation a bit. We've been focusing, obviously, on a domestic attack on Charlie Kirk, an assassination of Charlie Kirk. But then also, today is 9/11, where we do remember September 11, 2001, when terrorists took over three separate planes. One was four separate planes, two of them hitting the Twin Towers in New York City, one of them hitting the Pentagon, and the other one, many people believe it was aimed either at the White House or at Capitol Hill. But at that point, many Americans stood up and fought and were able to divert the plane. Daniel, in that time, you were working in the administration in the Department of Interior. If I'm not mistaken, you lived blocks away or took the metro there in the area of the Pentagon. Again, one of the places that was strike. Walk us through today, again, being 9/11. In this day, what is it that you remember about those events?
Well, yeah, I'll never forget it, Wadi. You're right. I lived 3 blocks from the Pentagon and took the Pentagon Metro to work that morning. By the time I actually got to the office, the first plane had struck. And I remember Mark Fively, who was the press secretary of the Department of Interior, was in his office and he had 2 or 3 people in there. And normally he's working away. And I don't know what the group of friends were doing there, but I walked in just to, find out what the plática was, right? And so, and everybody was staring at the television. And I look over, and there's one of the first towers billowing with smoke, and it was disbelief, right? What? Who in the what's happening, right? And so of course, it was explained to me that a plane had struck it, and wow, it hadn't even dawned on me that it could have been a terrorist attack. And while we're looking at it, the second plane hits, and that's of course everybody went into red alert.
Mhm.
I got a phone call from a friend at the White House, and that they were evacuating immediately. You could hear the Secret Service in the background telling them to get the hell out of the rooms. And so everybody sort of went into not a panic mode, but like into a whole different state of being, right? That we are under attack as a country, and we didn't couldn't, again, was sort of in disbelief. Now, we didn't even think to evacuate. I don't know what information the White House had. But as soon as we heard the news that the Pentagon had been struck, that's when all hell broke loose, right? And that's when we knew there may be other attacks coming, right? And everybody, of course, thought of the White House and the Capitol building. And it turns out that plane that went down in Pennsylvania was tracking, to DC. And so I tell you what, it just a sense of helplessness, right? The streets were gridlocked. I walked back, to my apartment near the Pentagon, across the Potomac, because there was no public transportation anymore. Everything was gridlocked. But I made my way to the Pentagon, and I remember standing there, just for about an hour, across the highway that's there, looking at the Pentagon with other people in absolute disbelief, looking at, emergency vehicles, the smoke still billowing from, that wedge of the Pentagon. And I knew the world would change after that. And of course, there was an absolute reset. And the president went into action. There was a mobilization that occurred. They all the presidential appointees were taken out of DC. We were taken, Department of Interior employees were taken to Shepherdstown, Virginia, where we were held up for 3 days. Karl Rove came over, talked to us, consoled us, told us what the plan was. And so all these things went into effect, but it was just an incredible day that again changed America.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Daniel. A sad parallel between what we saw yesterday and today is that these folks were who committed these acts had a goal behind it. On the Charlie Kirk side, it was silencing what he was pushing forward. I very much believe these attacks on 9/11 were an attack on the United States because of the principles and values that the United States affords its citizens and then exports to the world. Look, with the Charlie Kirk thing, there is a debate or a fight being had within the country. But 9/11 reminds us that there are folks outside of the country who hate what we stand for as a country, that we stand as a nation under God, that we stand believing that individuals should be free, that they should have the liberty to pursue their own path, that we believe in democracy, in the rights of individuals to vote. And we don't stay silent as a nation on those. We believe that is the best form that other nations, we believe that for Latin America, we believe that for Africa, we believe that for Asia, for Europe. And these individuals came to try to destroy and to send the message that they don't believe in these American values, that they don't believe what America has done, not just domestically, but internationally. How do you see this point of view?
I'm glad you say that, Wadi. You're spot on. I do recall immediately after 9/11 how the nation unified, right? How we came together. I remember clearly the president in Yankee Stadium, throwing out that ball. It was symbolic. I remember him at the 9/11 site, at Ground Zero in New York. I hear you, and those who did this are going to hear us. And the symbolism behind that. But it was also, again, I think what stood out more than anything was how the American people came together, unified, in support of the president, in support of our military. And look, what's happened with Charlie Kirk, again, is another seminal moment in the country where it could rip us apart. It could start a civil war of sorts, right? Where we resent each other, hate each other, and then act accordingly. Or we can come together, right? And we can understand each other, and we can be more open to, differing opinions, to maybe even seeking common ground on things and move the country forward. Because if we do get resentful and divisive and riot and vandalize, I don't know what's going to become of the country. I would rather we talk to each other, communicate, as Charlie was talking about, because once you stop talking, then of course, we're going to resort to violence. We're going to resort to other means. And I think we will suffer internally, and we won't need an outside force, to undermine us or do us in. We'll do it to ourselves.
Yeah, I was very young on 9/11. I believe elementary school, if I'm not mistaken. But I I remember 9/12. I remember 9/13, 9/14, 9/15, and what I mean by that is I remember folks putting American flags on their cars. I remember folks putting American flags in their front yard, hanging them from the window. There was a sense of patriotism, of love for country. There was unity. We were all felt that the 9/11 attack was not just an attack on New York, was not just an attack on the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. It was an attack on the American people. And as an American people, we can reflect on 9/11. We can reflect on what we saw yesterday, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And I think we can be united. I think the left and the right can unite around the belief that we shouldn't focus on our division, but that we should focus on the fact that we are in a nation where we can have discussions and debates on our differences, and that we can reach that common ground. So I think, again, I hope that when we see a 9/12, a 9/13, and the weeks that we had after 9/11, but we can see that today in the moment that we are right now as a society. Daniel, I want to thank you for joining us on this episode today to talk about the events that unfolded yesterday, and to remember what 9/11 was and what it will continue to be in the remembrance of our country. I want to thank our audience for tuning in. This has been The Game, the show where we go play by play, analyzing the game of politics. All right.